2025, Trump comes back in and punches China again. And this time, China says, okay, you want to do this? Fine. Gloves off, let's go. So first, let me reassure all our listeners that China isn't going to invade Taiwan anytime soon. First, because I'm not sure they can pull it off. As we're seeing with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, invading countries is a tough business. Now, when you try to invade Ukraine, you're essentially sending tanks across wheat and cornfields. Here, you're talking about over 100 miles of sea, and it's quite a treacherous sea at that. So, chances are it's a much, much bigger operation. So that's your first hurdle. Then you simply look at the political calendar in Taiwan. So Taiwan, like every country, is split, a third left, Democratic Party that's very pro-independence, a third right, the Kuomintang Nationalist Party that's very pro-business with China. Like most right-wing party, they want to make money. And then a third that moves around. Now, today, the Democratic Party, pro-independence, is in power, but it is literally polling in the 20s. It has never polled this low. So if you're China, you know that you just wait 2.5 years till the next election, and the Democratic Party will be wiped out, potentially destroyed, like potentially just wiped off the face of the earth. The only way the Democratic Party survives is if China starts rattling the cage. And then people could swing back to it. So you're not hearing any noise from Taiwan, on Taiwan from China. You wait patiently till the Kuomintang comes back in power. Then you open the checkbook, you do a lot of deals, and you tie up Taiwan economically with China. So if you're worried about Taiwan from that front, it's the wrong worry. Now, to your point, I would invite your listeners to do a Google search on Taiwan. Just Google search Taiwan war in US media. And what you find is that for the longest time, nobody cares. When did people start caring? It starts really in 2021, because what happened in 2020? In 2020, I think two things happened, or in 2020 and 21, two things happened. First, TSMC leapfrogged Intel. All of a sudden, TSMC can produce 5 nanomillimeter chips at scale in a way that Intel can't, and announces a 3 nanomillimeter chip. So all of a sudden, and you can see it very clearly, up until 2021, TSMC has a market cap that's roughly a third below that of Intel. Today, it's more than 10 times that of Intel. So TSMC, and essentially starting in 21, it becomes clear that TSMC is now the leading semiconductor producer in the world. So, going back to what you started with, Peter, in 2018, the US government decides to essentially say, I'm going to pick a fight with China, and that fight, I'm going to fight it on the battlefield of semiconductors. Because I have the biggest comparative advantage in semiconductors. I can crack China there. And then lo and behold, 100 miles from China's shore, here comes the best semiconductor company out of nowhere. So now all of a sudden the US is like, oh darn, the best semiconductor company is no longer Intel. It's no longer within my walls. It's over there. Now all of a sudden Taiwan is geostrategically very important in a way that it wasn't before. So that's number one. I think number two, that what happened, to be honest, and here, this might sound a little more controversial, but again, look at the Google search terms, and you see it clearly. U.S. decides to leave Afghanistan, and the exit is a total shambles. Biden goes out to 60 Minutes to give an interview to sort of justify the shambles that it was. And out of nowhere in that interview, he says, and if China thinks that because we left Afghanistan, they can go out and invade Taiwan, we'll protect Taiwan, which was a huge departure from U.S. policy up to that point. The policy of the U.S. was strategic ambiguity. We're not going to defend Taiwan, but we're not going to say we don't defend Taiwan either. And this is something that he then repeats twice. And this drives China up the wall because it's a shift in the U.S. policy until then. This is also when Pelosi decides to go visit Taiwan, which is the highest ranking U.S. politician ever to visit Taiwan. So, this drives China absolutely up the wall because it shifts the sort of soft status quo consensus that had existed until then. And since then, things have toned back down. But following this period, and personally, I almost wonder, why did the U.S. put Taiwan in play? Was it the semiconductors? Or was it the fact that having just taken a huge black eye on Iraq and then a huge black eye on Afghanistan, you need to justify somehow the fact that you're spending $1 trillion a year on the military budget and never winning any wars. And perhaps the best way to justify $1 trillion budget is to say, oh, look, China's about to invade Taiwan. We do need to build the next aircraft carrier. We do need more F-35s, in case they do this. And so I think this combination of factor led to this. Now we're in a totally different environment. We're in a much healthier environment. And we're in a healthier environment because if you go back to 2018, when the US punches China, China takes the punch. You go back to 2021, China punches China again takes the punch. But during this time, it's preparing. 2025, Trump comes back in and punches China again. And this time, China says, okay, you want to do this? Fine. Gloves off, let's go. You put embargo on semiconductors, I put embargo on rare earths. I put embargo on magnets. You want tariffs on me, I put tariffs on you. And China was the only one who fought back against Trump. EU, took the punch. Canada, Mexico, they took the punch. India, Brazil, everybody took the punch. China fights back. And amidst this fight back from China, the US realizes, hold on, without the magnets, in 2 weeks, the GM plant is shutting down. You've got Raytheon and Lockheed Martin saying, look, in a month, we can't provide weapons to Israel anymore. We can't provide them missiles because we're running out and we can't produce them without the rare earths. And so all of a sudden, the US realizes that, yes, China's vulnerable to us, but we're actually also vulnerable to China. So you get to this status quo, uneasy status quo. You look at the past 4 months, all of a sudden, nobody's talking Taiwan anymore. Again, do the Google search. It's fallen off the media landscape because we've now reached, I think, this truce between the US and China where the US realizes if we push China too hard, this is actually going to start hurting us and hurting us big time because, if the US can't produce missiles, is it still the US? So on this, the deal that's supposedly on the table, it's rumors and take this with a very, very healthy big dose of salt. But the deal that's supposedly on the table for when the KMT comes back is that, but for this deal to happen, the KMT would need to have 2/3 of parliament because you can't change anything without 2/3 of parliament. So it may never happen. But essentially the deal would be for the next 50 years, the current status quo prevails. So 50 years, current status quo prevails. Then in 50 years, we have 50 years of one country, two system like Hong Kong. So you keep your currency, your parliament, you can keep your army, you can keep your police. You do you, but we present you internationally. So you travel around, you lose your passport, you go to a Chinese consulate. We represent you at the UN, etc. We can put military radars on in Taiwan, etc. So that brings you to 100 years. And then in 100 years, we have a full merger. And by then, who knows what China looks like? Who knows? Everybody who makes the deal is dead, long gone. And so the reason this deal would be a tremendous deal for everyone involved is first, it diffuses the tensions. Secondly, such a deal would mean that Taiwan wouldn't need to spend 3.5-4% of GDP in essentially buying weapons from the US, which is protection payment. So you free up that money immediately. But most importantly, you reduce the uncertainty for all the businesses. So you unleash a wave of investment and a re-rating of the market. You look at NVIDIA today, it's a $4.3 trillion market cap. TSMC is a 1.4 trillion market cap. Now, NVIDIA can't live without TSMC. TSMC can live without NVIDIA. TSMC, I think, is actually the most valuable technology company in the world because they're definitely a step ahead of everybody else. And what they do, nobody else can do. But half of the investors don't want to own it because of this fear that if China invades Taiwan tomorrow, TSMC ends up being a hole in the ground and just disappears. And your 1.5 trillion in market cap goes to zero overnight. Now, you remove that risk, that 1.5 trillion probably becomes 3 trillion, 4 trillion. Pick the number. I remember so well, back when we met back in January of last year, and everybody was telling me, can't invest in China because China's going to invade Taiwan, etc. I'm like, okay, great. Do you own NVIDIA? Do you own Broadcom? Do you own Tesla? Do you own Apple? And they're like, of course, stock goes up. It's best stocks ever, etc. I'm like, okay, great. So you're telling me China's about to invade Taiwan. What's the value of NVIDIA when China invades Taiwan? The value is zero. NVIDIA can't produce chips. When China invades Taiwan, NVIDIA's essentially done for. Now, to be very clear, I absolutely do not believe China's about to invade Taiwan. But there's a sort of internal contradiction in people's portfolios where on the one hand, they tell you China is uninvestable because of this Taiwan conflict. And on the other, they own a bunch of stocks that will get absolutely decimated if that ever did happen.
头告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹润。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。